I want you to try something for a second. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and your job is just completely gone. Money doesn't exist, your boss doesn't exist, there's no alarm clock buzzing in your ear, and there is absolutely no inbox filled with urgent emails demanding you circle back or touch base. Sounds incredible, right? Well, that ultimate fantasy of total freedom, for about 300,000 years, that wasn't a fantasy at all. That was just everyday reality. 90,000. Let that massive number really sink in for a second. That is the approximate number of hours a modern human is going to spend working over their lifetime. We're talking a full third of your waking existence just gone. It's exactly why modern professionals are constantly battling this chronic burnout and digital fatigue today. But here's the crazy part. For the overwhelming majority of human history, the actual concept of a job simply did not exist. Okay, let's dive into this. What exactly did ancient humans actually do all day? I mean, from dawn to dusk, before employment, before agriculture, and before this endless 9-to-5 grind we're all so used to. To truly understand our past, and honestly to understand our present, we have to completely shatter some of the biggest myths you've probably been taught about prehistoric daily life. See, we've all been sold this Hollywood caveman myth, right? This completely false idea that prehistoric life was basically a non-stop primitive survival horror game, where everyone was constantly starving, terrified, and dead by age 30. But the hard anthropological and skeletal evidence shows the exact opposite reality. Early hunter-gatherers were actually taller, they were physically stronger, they had healthier teeth, and they enjoyed vast amounts of free time compared to the farmers that came after them. They weren't panicking out there, they were thriving. The data completely flips our assumptions. Back in the late 1960s, anthropologist Richard Lee meticulously tracked modern hunter-gatherers, like the Kung people of the Kalahari, and what he discovered was mind-blowing. They only spent about 15 hours a week. That is just 3 to 5 hours a day on subsistence work, hunting, gathering, fixing tools. The rest of the week, a staggering 153 hours dedicated entirely to leisure, socializing, and rest. Anthropologists literally dubbed them the original affluent society because they were astonishingly rich in the one thing we crave most, free time. And they protected this lifestyle fiercely. There's this brilliant story where Richard Lee bought a massive, incredibly fat ox for the tribe's Christmas feast, fully expecting their gratitude. But instead, the Kung relentlessly mocked the meat. They called it skinny, terrible, just awful. An elder finally explained it to him. He said, the bigger the kill, the harder they mock. Cut him down to size. It was this deliberate social tool. They mocked successful hunters to prevent arrogance and maintain strict social equality. Basically, nobody was ever allowed to act like the boss. And speaking of not having bosses, look at how they handled conflicts. They used something called voting with your feet. If a dispute got heated in camp, they didn't have courts, they didn't have prisons, they just packed up their few belongings in about 15 minutes and simply walked to another camp for a few weeks until the heat blew over. I mean, compare that ultimate physical freedom to our modern inability to simply walk away from a 30-year mortgage or a toxic job. Now, you might be wondering, okay, who was actually feeding the camp while everyone enjoyed all this leisure? Well, enter the grandmother hypothesis. While the men going out to hunt was highly dramatic and got a lot of attention, it was also incredibly unreliable. Most days, they came back totally empty-handed. It was actually the women who fed the camp through daily, steady gathering. And remarkably, the most productive members of the entire society were older grandmothers in their 50s and 60s. They were the ones bringing back the most reliable calories every single day. But listen, when they did hunt, it was an absolute biological marvel. Our bodies are literally engineered for what's called persistence hunting. We have unmatched sweating for total heat regulation. We've got this massive gluteus maximus muscle on our backsides built specifically for running. We have flat feet perfectly adapted for endurance, and this unique ability to breathe entirely independently of our running stride. Our ancestors didn't outsprint wildebeest, they chased them down at a steady jog in the blazing midday heat for hours until the animal just collapsed. When you run a modern half marathon, you are literally firing up ancient hardware built specifically for running down prey. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what they did with all that incredible free time. Look at the astonishing artifacts they left behind. We found 100,000-year-old shell beads from Blombo's cave, where someone trekked 40 kilometers round trip just to drill jewelry. There's a 40,000-year-old ultrabone flute from Germany, carved with perfectly spaced finger holes for sophisticated music, and 30,000-year-old cave paintings in Chauvet that use the natural rock curves to make cinematic 3D art by flickering firelight. They did all of this simply because they had the time to create beauty. And they used their time and their resources for something even more profound than art. This right here is Shanidar 1. He was a Neanderthal who lived to be around 40 years old, which was quite old at the time. But he survived for decades despite being deaf, partially blind in one eye, and missing his right arm. By any ruthless calculus of pure survival efficiency, he was a liability. But his community didn't leave him behind. They fed him, they protected him, and they cared for him purely out of love and humanity. So how did they maintain those deep bonds of care? Through Dunbar's number and social grooming. Hunter-gatherers spent 60 to 70% of their free time just talking. In fact, anthropologists argue that human language evolved specifically for this. While primates physically groom each other one-on-one, humans use language to socially bond with up to 150 people at once. Gossiping and chatting around a fire wasn't a waste of time at all. It was the original social technology keeping the entire community unified and alive. Even their nights looked entirely different from ours. Historian Roger Eckerich found that before artificial lighting, humans naturally had a two-phase sleep cycle. They went down at dusk for a first sleep, then naturally woke up around midnight for 1 to 2 hours in complete darkness. They used this time to talk, visit, or reflect before going back down for a second sleep until dawn. So that 2 a.m. insomnia you get where you feel oddly alert, that is an evolutionary mismatch caused by our modern artificially lit world. And when they were awake, just sitting around the fire, they experienced a profound state of cognitive rest. Neuroscience calls this the default mode network. It's the brain regions that activate only when your attention is completely unfocused and directed inward. Staring at a campfire, doing absolutely nothing, allowed for genuine cognitive rest and deep unconscious problem solving. It's a vital, healthy state of mind that we modern humans have almost entirely lost to our endless digital scrolling and constant notifications. Let's move to and see how this builds, because all of this freedom vanished during the grand turning point of human history, the agriculture trap. About 10,000 years ago, we traded in our foraging ways to start farming for food security. But honestly, it was a trap. Farming caused populations to absolutely explode. More mouths meant we required far more grueling, back-breaking labor just to survive. Because we were locked to the land and had surplus to protect, specialists emerged, armies emerged, and eventually bosses emerged. We traded our leisure for population growth, and we essentially invented jobs. The skeletal record makes this trade-off glaringly obvious. When we look at the bones, early hunter-gatherers were taller, had healthier teeth, and enjoyed immense free time. Early farmers, on the other hand, they were shorter, their bones were riddled with arthritis from endless repetitive labor, and their teeth were full of cavities from green-heavy diets. We literally traded our freedom and our physical health for food security, locking humanity right into the relentless 9-to-5 grind forever. So, the absolutely crucial point is this. We're walking around today with their biology, their nervous systems, and their intense need for deep social connection, but without any of their freedom. Our modern exhaustion and burnout isn't a personal failure. It is an evolutionary mismatch. You inherited a body engineered for a 15-hour work week and endless time around the fire. Knowing what you know now about how we used to live, would you want to go back? Knowing what we lost, maybe it is time we fundamentally rethink how we work today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. If you want to keep diving into mind-blowing realities just like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Subscribe to Keen Kansas right now so you never miss out on our deep dives. I will see you in the next one.